We're turning our attention to rugby. Alan Quinlan is with us. Alan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ger. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. The Georgian try, I don't know if you've seen the footage going viral on the internet of the Georgian commentary of the Georgian try, but they were pretty happy about the fact that third time's a charm and they finally managed to score.
Yeah, it was a great try. I suppose it was the Ireland players looked shocked, but the Georgian centre, Shevladze, it was a brilliant bit of work from him. Outstanding individual effort, but disappointing, and it gave them a huge boost and a huge lift in confidence as well. And I think as the game went on, they just felt that they were more and more in it, and they frustrated the life out of Ireland. You know, I've been involved in games against Georgia before, and they're always difficult. You probably have to earn the right to kind of go around them, if you like, and be really physical with them. But it was a very, very disappointing performance from Ireland yesterday.
Was that always going to happen when we were going to have that team? Or is this actually there's no excuse, or is there some excuse? What's your sense coming away from a game like that?
My sense coming away from the game is very, very disappointing. I think Ireland were so sloppy, and there's issues there that are just very frustrating to watch. I think Ireland just failed to break them down, and they're a very, very physical side, and they've lots of good individual players, but collectively we should be putting 25, 30 points on them as a minimum. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to them, but we scored 3 points in the second half. I think that's not good enough for a team of Ireland standing where they want to be. There's a lot of good Irish players out in the field. It wasn't a completely second-string team. Normally this time of year, and when you played a weaker nation in November, you'd have a completely second-string team out, but there was a lot of experienced internationals there. So I think overall they're just very, very sloppy, and they look like a team who their decision-making is poor, their identification of space, and they just revert to type really when there's a bit of pressure on, and look to go route one with picking and going around the side of rucks and one-out runners as well. So, look, you can't just throw the ball around, Ger, and expect against any team to just run around them. I think you've got to be physical. The breakdown was a big issue as well. So I think we've regressed so much in that area in the last couple of years, and under Joe Schmidt, Ireland were so good at the breakdown, so efficient, and we look very, very disjointed at the minute. So there's a lot of concern in there. Me being a former player, I do understand that sometimes the harder you try, and when you're playing against an opposition who are full of passion and fight, they can make it very difficult for you. But I think Ireland's just their initial contact, their urgency, their aggression and stuff like that was poor yesterday. I think particularly after England, look, you're always hoping for and expecting a reaction, and if Ireland had loads of mistakes yesterday and looked really dangerous, it'd be more acceptable. But I think it was a really dire second half performance, and concerning, because you'd have to question the mentality of the players and the responsibility of playing in the team and where that's at the moment, and it's just not good enough.
It definitely seems like that, Alan. Because as you alluded to there, the very fact that they got beaten up at times by England the previous week, the fact that they had that defeat in Paris as well at the end of the Six Nations, this should have been a team going out raring to go to write people off, and they didn't seem to have that mentality yesterday, that mentality to go out and prove to people that they were going to go out and kill a minnow, because that's what it might have been in, say, 2018.
Yeah, look, in fairness, I'm sure they had that mentality on. I'm sure that that was their ambition. But it just didn't happen. And I think it didn't happen for a various number of reasons. There was a lack of urgency. Georgia made it very difficult for them at the breakdown. And they're a very physical side who won't just wilt. They're very proud to play for Georgia. And look, I suppose looking back at Georgia over the years in World Cups, they do get better as tournaments go along, and they get confidence, and they can play. They have a lot of good players, but collectively we should be, as I said, so much better than that. I think Ireland have got to look within themselves now and and really figure out what they're doing. I suppose the mitigating factors, and I said this last weekend, it's from an attack point of view, there's a bit of a transition on there from the way they want to play. That's what they keep telling us, but we don't see a lot of that flair and attack and that real kind of fluidity, if you like, of getting the ball wide and getting the ball to the wingers that they can run at their opposition one-on-one and try and get a bit of stretch opposition defences. If you run, it's the same as playing against Italy. If you run around the fringes at them all day, like, they're going to smash you, and they love that physical side of the game. And Georgia loved that yesterday. Saw the reaction when they turned the ball over, and we were just soft going into the breakdown. And it's fine. Andy Farrell now rollicking these players after the game or giving out to them this week and having a real cut off them. But the players have got to take responsibility with this one. Like I say, part of me still, kind of understands that sometimes you get games like that, and Ireland are going through a bit of a rocky patch. I think they played really well against Wales for patches. Last week I wouldn't have been that critical of them. England, as I said, England are capable of doing that to many players, but we just have to see more in attack, a bit of variety, and there's a couple of areas that Ireland just need to really improve on. Their efficiency around the breakdown. Georgia have a strong scrum. Our scrum was poor. Finlay Bealham struggled at loose head. It's difficult for him coming over from tight head, and just the attack was blunt, and we're just not finding space or identifying space. And a lot of the passes that the backs are given look lobby. It looks really deep at times, and quite pedestrian. It doesn't look like we're really flowing in fifth gear in attack and putting pace and energy onto the ball.
That's a laundry list of issues, Alan. How many of those are actually fixable? Is it that the team doesn't really fully understand yet what it's trying to do, or is it that it understands what it's trying to do and is incapable of executing?
It's a bit of both, Ger. I think obviously we're missing some talented players from the team. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of chopping and changing. Preparation time is a little bit poor. Confidence is low. What they're trying to do is maybe a little bit different. The term heads-up rugby was mentioned before yesterday and after the game as well. And Andy Farrell addressed that himself, saying that, heads-up rugby is fine, but you've got to do the basics well. And, I said that. I did a piece for the Ind on Saturday about the lineouts. Your attack is under massive pressure if your set piece is struggling. And of course with the breakdown as well, if that's slow. I think they're all fixable for sure. And look, maybe the expectation that we've had for a couple of years around this team needs to be tempered a little bit. And look, we've got to analyse and address the issues there. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It's going to take a little bit of time. I think the Six Nations is going to be trickier for them. If they can get a performance against Scotland next weekend, which I'm sure they'll be a lot better. I'm sure of that. Scotland are going to be very dangerous coming to Dublin. But if they could finish on a really good performance against Scotland in Dublin, well, then they look at the middle two games and say, look, these are things we got to work on, get different personnel back for the Six Nations and maybe get some more fresh faces into the squad.
But where is the personnel lacking then? If you go through that team yesterday, where are the big glaring weaknesses?
Well, I think X Factor is one of them. So someone like Jordan Larmour gives you that spark of open play, from the backfield. I think Will Addison is someone that maybe has had a lot of injuries, but very, very talented player. There's a lot of chopping and changing in the centres. What's our best centre partnership? Gary Ringrose missing his brilliance as well. I think, Ian Henderson coming back into the side is going to get better. Tyke Furlong has got to come back in. Dave Kilcoyne, hooker, Ronan Kelleher has played a couple of games there and still developing. Caelan Doris is not in the team that long. So there's a lot of players have come in. There's been a fair bit of chopping and changing. He's capped a number of players. Shane Daly got his cap at the weekend. But look, I think I'm not really sure where they're at the moment. I think they're not really sure themselves, and that's what they're probably showing us. You know, there's been a fair number of changes in the side, and it's been a strange time to get an international team ready. So we're way off where England are at the moment. And I said this last weekend, we're you know, Wales, Scotland, Ireland are a level above England, and France are probably a step above that. England are on the top in the Six Nations. So it's hard to know. If they can produce a performance next weekend, well, there'll be a bit more optimism going forward. But there's a couple of players that could come into the group for the Six Nations. Ryan Baird being one. I've said that a couple of weeks ago. And if they get their full complement of players back, I think they'll be better. But we have to find a 9 and a 10 for the next World Cup.
Yeah. I think
proper alternatives.
Do you remember Matt O'Connor ran himself into the hardest with the IRFU? We got in the most trouble essentially because he would bang on about not having the players available during the Six Nations, and they were like, that's the job. In international rugby, I always feel like you can't complain too much about not having players available to you, because rugby is so attritional. At least a quarter of your squad at some point is going to be nursing an injury. So it's how the team perform on a consistent basis that shows us that your coaching and your philosophy is getting through to the side. So sooner rather than later, they're going to have to stop using the excuses of the missing players and say, well, at the breakdown we performed really well, our set piece performed really well, and something didn't come off for us, or we won because of that. Like, that's the bit where I have a lot of sympathy with how he took over the job really quickly, and yet at the same time he's been part of that management team for such a long period of time too. So there's some mitigating factors there from the international, the break and COVID and not being able to get players together. It's not like he's an entirely new voice to them. They should understand quite a bit about what he's trying to do. So he's under a bit of pressure is essentially the short way of saying what I'm saying here.
Yeah, they're all under pressure, and he'll know that. Look, Andy Farrell is a very honest fella and has inspired a lot of these players over the years. And some of the younger players coming into the squad will understand that passion and enthusiasm and inspiring effect that Andy Farrell has. But that's all fine. But you've got to have tactics. You've got to not look predictable. And every team that plays Ireland now thinks they can ruffle them up, get in their faces, and you know, make them look predictable. Neil Doak and David Humphreys have been involved with Georgia, so you know, if you're analysing how do you get out and stop Ireland playing, well, you've got to be very physical with against them and go after the set piece, go after the breakdown. So he's got to find a way. The coaching team have got to find a way of putting more variety in attack, coming up with something different, finding an identity about the way they play, because the way the game has gone now, like, you know, the one-out runners. I criticised Warren Gatland last year after one of before the World Cup, the Six Nations. You know, he came out and said Ireland play a lot off 9 and it's predictable, and it was different then because I think Ireland were so alert and efficient and aggressive at the breakdown that a lot of the time they wore the life out of teams and they scored in critical times, and you just had they had a body language about them. You know, that's going to hopefully develop within this group, and you know, they'll learn from these experiences and hopefully they'll get better. It's hard to have a huge amount of optimism at the moment because we don't know our best team now. We don't know lots of different combinations are there's an uncertainty about them.
So how long should we give that? How long should that,
Well, I think a proper, a proper assessment will be next Six Nations. They've got England and France and Dublin. They're away to Wales, Scotland and Italy. So I think, you know, there'll be a lot of criticism and question marks if Ireland don't perform well. And it'll beat at least England or France in Dublin. You always have to try and at least win one of those games. England are going to be very difficult, but and try and get wins on the road and put yourself in a decent position. So look, I think they could turn it around. Of course, there's still a lot of good players there. There's a couple of areas that were a bit weaker and that are concerning than you'd like. So they probably need a bit of time. But look, at the end of the day, if the attack, if we don't see more in attack and we don't see a bit of consistency in attack and confidence in attack, well, Mike Catt is under pressure, Andy Farrell is under pressure, Simon Easterby's under pressure, and John Fogarty. So they're all under pressure, and that's the way it's going to go. And that's the kind of standard that the Irish rugby team are held in at the moment. If they have poor performances, there's a lot of question marks asked. But look, I think they can turn it around, and hopefully next weekend they can get a bit more free-flowing ball and attack Scotland. And it's a team, Scotland are a team that they'll try and play more rugby against them, whereas Georgia tried to stop Ireland and really frustrate them yesterday. So they've got to learn from those type of games, Ger, that when teams try to outmuscle them and really frustrate them, and too often we're seeing that those problems and issues arise. But 6 clean line breaks yesterday against Georgia, that tells its own story. So the attack is going to be continuously scrutinised, and just individual brilliance. You just love to see players do something exciting and with pace and energy and make a few line breaks. At times in the first half they showed glimpses of it, but the second half was just not good enough at that level.
All right. Well, we'll have plenty of time to analyse and talk about the Scotland game. At the moment, Ireland are massive favourites for that Scotland game, 9-point favourites, which doesn't seem to make that much sense to me from what we've been seeing. It seems like Scotland are resurgent at the moment, and I'd say the Scots are coming here licking their chops for the first time against us.
Yeah, there's no doubt they will. I think they, as I said, most teams sense a bit of vulnerability, and we don't have a settled Irish team at the moment. And he's damned if he does, and if you do, and damned if you don't. Andy Farrell, he's had to try and bring in some new players. And as I said, look, you don't just throw guys in for the sake of it. They have to. There's a certain sense when you see certain players playing for their provinces that they'll, become internationals and not just one-trick ponies or players who just come in for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Like I say, there's certain positions that there's a concern with the depth chart in, but Scotland will fancy their chances. But it's a chance for Ireland to maybe finish on a high. And if they did finish with a really good performance against Scotland, well, there'll be a bit of forgiveness for the 2 games in the middle.
All right, Alan, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Cheers, lads.